Good afternoon, Abbotsford residents. I'm Mr. Pelican. I'm running for mayor to bring the RCMP into Abbotsford on the organized crime. We're going into the federal election on Monday, and I just want to take you back a little bit here in time. I stand in the Fraser Valley on number 3 road where the flood took place. When Darren Braun, Henry's son, gave me this picture in 2020 that Henry Braun was planning the SkyTrain through Abbotsford, and it was his vision because he used to own P&R. He said, you know how rich my dad and his friends will be when he lobbies that through. I knew that was Henry's vision of taking the city, the community plans and everything. But today, I'm here today to speak to you about the federal election. These 4 men, I want you to read this here, are true conservatives to Ottawa. Mike de Jong, under the Capricha logo, is not allowed to be printing that he is a conservative. He's running as an independent. He's got the Liberals. You don't see the Liberals saying we're conservatives. You don't see the Greens saying we're true conservatives. You don't see the PPC. He's purposely deflecting and stealing votes by making people think that, oh, Mike's a conservative, let's vote for conservative. He won't put independent there, he's putting conservative there. Pulling the votes by misleading. It's fraud. Then what happens when the candidate complains, he'll say, I'm sorry, and he'll go pull it down and rewrite it. But in the meantime, 3,000 voters have been stolen. Mike de Jong's been cheating. Either, I want to elaborate one thing. I saw Councillor Mogel attacked by the Abbotsford Task Force when he was running for mayor because Henry didn't want a South Asian as mayor. Henry Brown called my neighbor a dumb brown Hindu cow in order me and him should work together because we were white. These 5 men on the Capricha newspaper, Ed Fast, George Perry, Henry Braun, John Van Doggen, and Mike de Jong, show that they're clearly, this is an all-white boys club. There is no South Asians or Indos backing Mike de Jong of this community, not a one. This was either based on pure racism, that they do not want that conservative candidate, Sukhman Gill, running, or it was based that Darren Braun said, Henry Brown's pulling all these up. These 5 people stand to say we're a voice of the community, but they never came here on the flood to use their influence, their politicals, and as leaders that were for these flood victims. They weren't. Because they now, Henry begs on them, we need Mike in to clean everything up. The cheating, my attempted murder, and everything. But first, I want to say, what happened in Vancouver to the Filipinos, my heart goes out to them. I understand what took place, especially from the victims that survived and that were injured. When Henry tried to run me over, the grief and anguish you got to suffer the rest of your life. I'm deeply touched with that. I worked with the Filipinos, many of them in the construction industry. But this, by the Conservative Party, has to anguish that Mike de Jong has to be removed. He's full-blown out cheated. He has no other way. He can't knock on doors. He has had endorsements by the chamber, and now all this. I want to ask John Van Doggen, if this is an all-boys club, and this is pure racism, which we have to call out, because there's no South Asians, not even Dave Sadu, has endorsed shitbox Mike de Jong, not a one, because it was an all-boys club. George Perry, who's a Liberal, should not be here. Mike de Jong is not allowed to say that he's a conservative, and this is misleading, send conservatives to Ottawa. George Perry's a Liberal. Henry Brown's a Liberal. He was tied to Kevin Falcon, you knew this. These are Liberals. Ed Fast, I could say, is a Liberal. He was just John Charest. These are Liberals misleading the conservative candidates of the Conservative Party that they're there. But this is where these 5 men should have stayed right here for the flood victims and spoke, and they didn't do it. They're saying they're leaders of Abbotsford community. They're not. They're lobbying to get Mike de Jong in, and as the leaders of Abbotsford community, you would have been here for the flood victims, and that's where you would have used your influence, your political, and your leadership, and they were never here for the flood victims. They never once. Henry couldn't load him and get him here. He stood on the stage when he was no longer the mayor, beside that garbage Ross Siemens, and tried to lobby for the $500 million was here. Calls for the Conservatives, the Liberals, now to get involved with what's taking place in Abbotsford. It led to threats, it led to organized crime, it led to jobs lifts, it led to racketeering, and it led to taking advantage of the city private police department for Henry to own them. Without the private police threatening me and coming down and smashing my camera, I now can do podcasts. Maybe Watts has pulled them in and rearranged them in and going through all the officers that Henry controlled, and Henry can't control them. Mike DeYoung is still cheating, and he believes no matter what, on Monday with all my cheating, when they announced that Mike DeYoung's won and he's beat these guys, that I can go forward. There's more than enough, because Henry controlled the electorals. You could see he controlled bylaw. You could see it everywhere. Henry owned this town. When Darren Brown showed me and gave me this article, what his dad was setting up for the Fisher Community Plan, knowing that his dad built in SkyTrain and everything else, it would come from Langley to Abbotsford and he would be rich, and roll houses. Henry knows he's got to get Mike there, and Mike would then lobby for the SkyTrain and everything else and all the infrastructure. Mike DeYoung has frauded Abbotsford. Mike DeYoung stood by when Henry got in his car, tried to kill me as an MLA and a former Attorney General, but Mike DeYoung never stood here as an MLA and pressured David Eby and pressured Trudeau. These four leaders weren't. Henry has to be begging his life out to save the last bit that's left to him. He's lost everything. He knew that I found out from Darren Brown he was controlling Vicky Hopes to write these garbage stories, and Vicky Hopes should be calling it out. Where were these leaders now? They weren't. You could see them. Henry was the engine and the mob leader. This is where you use your influence. This is where you use your political power, and this is where you get all the leaders together, and then you call out to help the farmers. Henry couldn't do it because they said, oh, let Henry go there. He wants that money himself. Henry has to now do this. This is obvious. We need the RCMP in Abbotsford. Private police got owned, and they were carrying threats to load elections and control it for a head of a mob. Henry Brown led a vicious mob like no others. He led them in professional, which were in government offices and sworn dignities, and nobody would ever question that. When Darren Brown brought me Henry, his dad's vision, and what his dad was setting up, Ron Funk's jobs, Ron Funk being the CEO and everything. Even Eric Nival, Mike DeYoung's financial agent, knows that this bullshit thing by Dave Sidhu and using send conservatives to Ottawa is misleading, and it's fraud, and it's election fraud, and the candidates have to sue you because no other candidate's doing it. He must state, send an independent to Ottawa, and that's what he must state. It's misleading. Then they'll figure, well, we'll retract it. Same with Ed Fast, Facebook. They're out of the two conservatives that's running, there's only one, licensed, recognized, and qualified by Pierre Poilievre. They are very scared because they can't own him. There's the picture when Henry drove through the flood with Mike Sir, Ed Fast, and Henry Brown. Look at what we could do. I believe, in my own opinion, that Henry caused this flood so he could get this money. That's how vicious he was, because it shows you here, this is the first thing I would have did as mayor. Not only that, I would have brought all the farmers, all the victims, and all the leaders together. And he didn't do it, because it was a garbage frame job, figuring we'll muscle Abbotsford with this false advertising under Dave Sidhu's newspaper to trick Abbotsford to get Mike DeYoung in. And that's what it was about. First of all, let me tell you, Pierre said don't split the votes. This is splitting the votes because Mike's a full-out liberal. Don't split the vote. But Abbotsford victims and farmers, you have to pay a close attention to this. This will send shockwaves that Henry Brown's full of shit, and so is John Van Doggen. So is George Perry, and so is Ed Fast. They were behind a mob leader, reeling a mob and stealing it out of her city bank account. And Henry's son opened the door. And Henry's son would tell you today, this is where they all supposed to be. The man that would be standing here would be George Ferguson. And he would put these leaders here. These guys were never leaders of Abbotsford. It's an all-boys club. There is no South Asian endorsements behind Mike because they're pure racism. Henry kept the Abbotsford police from having in those. You know that fight with Eric Nival, the discrimination and everything. And now it clearly shows that the whole thing is, the whole target of Henry and everything at Suk Mangel is because he's brown, and stop it. Never mind just the money. And that's why he pulled all them people together. And that is clearly. And as an Abbotsford resident, as farmers and everybody else, we have to now stand up and call this out. And we have to say, we got to vote for Suk Mangel and the federal Conservatives and put this in to stop this establishment, this discrimination, and allow people on our police force, allow people in our city that are brown, and allow people everywhere. Henry was controlling that, and I knew it from Darren Braun. That is why he could stand on this stage, knowing the only man that has not entered that picture to put his face there is Darryl Plunkus. They called him Law Dog. He was smart enough to know that this was a snow job. And Darryl Plunkus will tell you, as former Speaker of the House, is Law Dog. You can't be banishing the Conservative logo on top of you. Ed fast. You just don't stop, do you, Ed? You're in too deep, and everybody can see it. Your own daughters and everybody can see it. Henry Brown got in a car, ladies and gentlemen. Came to a protest where our houses were damaged, and we moved. Hit and run me. Fled from the scene. Left, sold his Lexus car, which we all know. Then used his influence and sitting on the police board and asked Mike Sir to cover it. He fled. Mike Sir fled from the Abbotsford Police, believing uniform. When Darren Brown opened his mouth, I knew, no matter how much I stood on the world stage, it wasn't going to be a conspiracy, because I didn't have to seduce Henry's wife or his daughter. I had the most precious gift for the information, Henry's son. Ted Fast, I make it clear, your MP position covered up organized crime. To Mike de Jong, the Attorney General, your MLA position covered up organized crime. To George Perry, you're a Liberal, and you know you're not allowed to be put in Conservative. So Dave Sadu either did that, or who paid that ad, you need to be sued, because you're not allowed to be making them false claims. You do not see the Liberal saying here, send a Conservative. It's misbrand, it's wrong, it's misleading, and it's stealing the votes. And Henry said, now what we'll do, like we did with Vicky Hopes, when Vicky Hopes said I was dragged and beat by the cops. We'll retract that statement, but the damage is done. You're not going to retract this statement. Henry Brown is the ringleader of this mob. And this is clearly, ladies and gentlemen, an all-out boys club based and on racism. Please, we got to step away from that. We got to call that out at all times, and you can see it. Not a one. South Asian. Right across that road is the Corn King. Well-recognized guy, Jelly Lolly, Roop Paneer Trucking, real big people in Abbotsford. Not a one endorsing Mike de Jong, and not even Dave Sadu or Kelly Shahal, because they won't allow him to endorse them because they're brown. I'm live, Abbotsford, British Columbia. John Van Doggen, the Dutch told me today, they want, I don't know if it's possible, but they are. They asked me, they want to pull your Dutch citizenship away. I said, oh, that will be a little hard. He said, no, dentist, pull your teeth out. To John Van Doggen, either you were for shot, photo bob, or Henry had to give you the brown envelope. That'll come out just like the rest of it. But you ain't gonna outrun this one. And this little picture of SkyTrain 2020 is what Darren Brown gave me, knowing his dad was going in to see the community plan, like Beetlejuice. If you ever watched the movie, the mayor had the whole town and the development. Ron Funk and the Versus Jobs fast track. That's why Henry be partnered up with Ron Funk to go and log the Cacaro Ranch. It's fraud on taxpayers. It's not only that, it's corporation fraud. It's racketeering, and it's a mob, and it's a mafia. And then Henry controlled the city councils to rush the votes for it. But Henry needed the most important thing, and I knew it. The Abbotsford Police to hold investigations, criminal investigations, elections investigations, tampering, loading, and everything else, and bribery. To Henry Braun, you should have thought twice before you got in that car. There was no other way but this world stage. There's no lawyers. There's nobody going to save you from this. We want the full weight of the law. We want the federal, provincial, and all governments to see that this town was run by a mob leader, Henry Brown. And we want all leaders in government to see, and candidates and my Abbotsford residents and farmers to see, that these leaders didn't stand here for the flood victims and beg the money when they could have pressured it. They're there now. That means Henry had to go back and say, forget it. You know, political politicians were allowed to do this, but then we're supposed to be buddies and everything else. This wasn't about politics. This landed up on our families and our residents, and this was about greed and a mob leader that couldn't lose control of Abbotsford, and he locked her in tight. And even the leader himself that Henry put in charge here and snowed him in, Ross Siemens, can't even stand here and beg for these farmers. I made it clear, as mayor, a special committee. The first thing Abbotsford City Mayor will never have is the money. There'll be a special committee set it. The farmers will get the money in their hands and they'll get the help. There won't be Henry's Dike Committee, and Ditch Committee will be re-emplaced back here. Henry won't have the infrastructure to build for the $500 million in the gravel pits and everything. When Darren Brown brought it to me, I knew it wasn't a far-fetched idea. This greedy little bugger was going all the way. I'm live, Abbotsford, British Columbia. And to Chief Watts, Paul Harvey used to say, now you know the end of the story, the rest of the story. You should ask them why they're not on the dike. Abbotsford, British Columbia.